Eli David. I'm the CEO of StartupLink.com. I'm going to share a little bit of more information about Startup Link later on, so you have a little bit of reference and how it connects also to startup communities. Today we're going to speak a little bit, it's going to be a relatively short presentation. We're going to speak a little bit about some kind of an introduction about Startup Link and what we do, then a little bit of key advice for developing startup ecosystems using communities more than anything, and a little bit of case studies as well. And again, we're very interested to hear your opinion and your case studies as well. So feel free to interact. We're a relatively small group. We're a little bit over 10 people here, so we can really kind of keep the discussion going in general. A little bit about what we're doing. You probably heard about us at some point. We're building a global startup ecosystem map and a research center. This is basically how it looks like. We have about 70,000 startups, co-working spaces, accelerators, and so on. The project is relatively known. It's been featured only in the last half a year by hundreds of magazines, and they focus more than anything on the rankings that we do. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. Lots of influencers, prime ministers, ministers, people like Guy Kawasaki are talking about this project. So it's super great to see that we're making some impact and helping entrepreneurs. Let me show you a little bit of our community element. I'm going to share a link with you later. We have 90 communities around the world with about 50,000 entrepreneurs via meetup.com. And we're going to talk a little bit about events as a way to basically promote startup ecosystems. So that's something that we're going to talk about. I'm going to share the link so you can also join our meetups and take part in the events that we have, a mix of online and offline events. So let's talk for a second, and again, feel free to participate either in the chat and the Q&A button. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Let's talk a little bit about why are communities critical for startup ecosystems. So first of all, the idea over here is that communities sounds like a really good feeling, good vibe word and so on, but they're much more deeper than that. In the essence, communities are creating connections. Check every successful startup there is. It cannot go anywhere without connections. So if you have a community, a startup community, a robust startup community in your city, you're very much more likely to have successful startups just by connecting people with resources that they need, mostly people, connecting them with co-founders, investors, and so on. So the idea is that without communities, there is no connection. If there are no connections, we're all working alone. If we're working alone, we will not reach that far. So it's something to kind of think about. Other than that, communities are also creating a mindset. So on the mindset side, I'll just let you know that this is critical, the mindset side. If basically in many startup ecosystems, and we research the topic of startup ecosystems very extensively, the main problem is lack of entrepreneurial mindset, meaning everyone wants to get their 9-to-5 job, and that's problematic. It's actually a killer. And for example, Joao, I see that you're from Lisbon. I was there actually in the Web Summit. And actually, one of the problems that we identified when we researched Portugal, for example, is that a lot of the population, just like in other countries in Europe, like Spain and Greece and Italy, is less interested in entrepreneurship and more interested in the 9-to-5, in the stable 9-to-5. So the idea is that if you have robust startup communities, you're in a situation that people can actually connect with other entrepreneurs and not feel isolated as they're building their startup, feeling kind of like out of the norm, that society is kind of looking at you and saying, why did you get a job? You know. So the idea over here is that by connecting, we can also connect to other like-minded people and not feel like we're the only crazy people that are trying to work on an innovative idea. Communities allow transfer of knowledge, which means that basically if you have a community, you can receive cutting-edge knowledge of topics that are relevant for you on marketing, development, whatever is relevant. So the idea is that the knowledge sharing is much better where there is a community. And communities also offer emotional support in an uncertain startup path. The idea is that startups are extremely difficult. And when you have a community, you can actually connect to other people that are facing the same challenges like you. And instead of quitting, you kind of make each other stronger. And you have a lot of points in the life of each startup that you really feel like quitting. That's life. That's a startup life in a way. So in conclusion, an ecosystem without communities cannot compete with hubs. The hubs have a community. So if you're in an ecosystem currently, and by the way, Joe, Lisbon has a great startup community. So that's an advantage of the ecosystem, and that helps to basically transition Portugal to a more entrepreneurial mindset. So the idea is that ecosystems must have communities. And if those communities are lacking, nothing good is going to come out of it. So that's a little bit about the, let's say, importance of community. By the way, if anyone else wants to say just their location, where are they from, I can give examples from other places as well if I know something about your location. So feel free to tell us in the chat. Now let's move on a little bit to discuss the next slide, which is about the first step to basically develop an ecosystem is to analyze it. So the idea is that without information, it's very, very difficult to develop an ecosystem. So the idea is that why is that so important? Knowing and having more information about an ecosystem than just a general feeling. Startup ecosystems in different stages require different approaches of development and community building. So for example, the startup ecosystem of Tel Aviv in Israel requires definitely different approaches and different processes and work than the startup ecosystem of, let's say, Praia in Cape Verde. I was just now in a consulting work for the government of Cape Verde, and over there it's just starting. So the idea is that once you know what is relatively the stage of the startup ecosystem, you can kind of figure out what is the right way to develop it in a way and participate in building it in a way. Now, the balance between the public sector and the private sector also changes drastically depending on the stage of your startup ecosystem. So anyone wants to guess when is in the chat, if anyone is brave enough to guess, when is the public sector most needed? In the initial stages of a startup ecosystem or when the startup ecosystem is ready to scale? Let's see if we have any guesses. I'm looking forward to seeing if someone can guess. I'm going to give you 5 or 10 seconds while also checking the chat. Just a minute. Gotcha. So first of all, hi Ravi. Good to have you here. I see that you're from Chennai, India. India has a great startup ecosystem that is having a good momentum. Joao is guessing infrastructure initial, and your guess is of course correct. Actually, governments are very much needed in the initial stage of an ecosystem. So because the idea is that there is nothing and there aren't enough prizes for the private sector to push and develop the ecosystem. So that's why governments are really needed in the beginning. And also what you said, that the infrastructure is very expensive and someone has to put the initial one. So the idea is that in order to figure out the strategies for an ecosystem, you kind of need to know what is the current stage of the ecosystem because of the reasons that we mentioned. And also say that the benefits and roles of startup ecosystem developers change as the ecosystem develops. So for example, for a very advanced ecosystem like Tel Aviv, you can kind of count on the corporations to take the lead. They're going to sponsor all those free dinners for everyone to come and show and kind of network and so on and so on. In a place like Cape Verde, for example, you would need basically the governments themselves or the universities to do a lot of the efforts, and a lot of the efforts are depending on entrepreneurs. So I want to tell you that in a relatively small ecosystem that is just starting, you as a single entrepreneur can become a legend. You can become a real legend of the ecosystem because there is not that much there. So just by deciding that you're taking an active role, and not necessarily as a public sector, but also as an entrepreneur, you can make an immense impact. And Joao, probably Lisbon, it's a little bit too late to have an immense impact over there. But if you go a little bit south, I don't know, let's go, you go north to Espinho or anything like that, there is currently nothing there in a way. So if you're in a situation that you become a startup leader in a specific town, I was in Spinga for 2 months actually last year. I love it. So the idea is that you can really become create some kind of a legacy on developing the ecosystem. So pretty interesting to see how just one person, not necessarily even the government, can become so important in the development of the ecosystem. And the conclusion over here is that in order to start developing the ecosystem, you have to realize in which stage is it currently and use as many tools as possible to kind of figure out basically if it makes sense. So, or what should be your strategies. Now, let's talk a little bit about our rankings, because the rankings are actually allowing you exactly that. They allow you to use a ranking that is free to kind of figure out where are you. The beauty of our rankings is that we're ranking the startup ecosystems of 1,000 cities and 100 countries around the world. It's an algorithm that is running on tens of thousands of data points. It is checking the quantity, the quality, and the business environment. I told you previously that we had hundreds of press mentions. It's because of those rankings. So basically, they're becoming an authority when people are judging the strength of a startup ecosystem. Here are a few links that you have over here for diving a little bit deeper, because that's not the topic for today. So if you wish to go dive a little bit deeper, I'm going to try sharing the links right now. So just a second. Just a moment. Yeah. I'm going to put the relevant links for you in the chat, and you can dive a little bit deeper. The rankings are really fun, by the way, because they allow you to really do cross analysis of many, many countries and cities. So pretty interesting thing. And there is also a report that accompanies the rankings that you can read of 150 pages. And again, everything there is totally for free. So you can use it. And let me just quickly paste the so I'm going to paste links to the rankings and to the report that you can have now. And yeah, I should put it on the chat so you can have later. If you go to startuplink.com, you can register a startup, go below the map, and then you're going to see massive ranking tables. And if you want to download the report, here it is. And that's a report that basically ranks startup ecosystems in 100 countries. Now, a little bit about how did we prepare it. We have global data partners like Crunchbase, SimilarWeb, SEMrush, that we work together with them and their API integrations. And we also have data that is gathered by users themselves. So if you're a little bit patriotic about your startup ecosystem, add your startup there, and basically it gets added into the algorithm. That's pretty cool. I'll also say that we're working with dozens of governments around the world, municipalities, economic development, corporates, and so on, to get more and more data and analysis from them, as well as we're processing the data and rank the cities and the countries. So it's a little bit about what do we do, and that's how it looks like, by the way. Those are the ranking tables that if you go to the site, you're going to see more or less something like that. So this is, for example, the countries. You can switch to the cities and basically have a very deep analysis of a few verticals, of few items of quantity, quality, and business score, and the total score that shows you the ranking, and you can search also by country and city. Okay, so now that we talked a little bit about the analysis of how well your startup ecosystem is doing, and by the way, when you go back to the rankings, if you see your city in the top 50, that means that you're a very, very developed hub. Top 50 city is a good place to be in general, by the way. 50 to 100, it's basically upcoming ecosystem or an ecosystem that is very well positioned. Between 100 to 200, it's an ecosystem that either goes up or down, but has good signs of life. 200 to 400, it's a little bit sketchy. Like it's starting, but it's not really that strong. And above 400 to 1000, those are the weaker ecosystems that really are in a critical phase of either making it or breaking it. And if it's not even in the top 1000, you're probably in the wrong place. And that means that either you decide to lead the ecosystem or you probably have to relocate if you're building a startup. That's the advice generally. Why is it important to be in a startup ecosystem? We all know why, but let's talk again about why does it matter. Many startup entrepreneurs are not aware that the place that they're going to pick for their startup is greatly going to influences their chances of growth and survival. And the idea is that as talented and strong as you are, it doesn't really matter. If you're not really in a situation that you're in a good place, everything is against you. It's harder to get investment. Investment is critical, by the way, over here, because I have to tell you, investors are only in the top 50 cities in the world. If you're even between 50 to 100 and you're going strong on investors, you're probably not going to be that successful. So investors are very known to scatter, to kind of focus on hubs. That's what they do. Raising investment is difficult. Finding clients is difficult because clients are usually in the good ecosystem. Finding quality service providers is also difficult because the most talented people have the most knowledge and they're usually in the top startup ecosystem. Finding co-founders and team members with entrepreneurial mindset, also very difficult if you're not in the right place because people just want to be in the 9 to 5. Go find another talented co-founder. If you go to an ecosystem, everyone is in the mindset, or a lot more people are in the mindset of starting a startup. So you have a pool, a lot bigger pool of startup founders to team up with. One more thing that a good startup ecosystem has is a public sector that is encouraging entrepreneurship and is not against you. And in many cases, in the small ecosystems, they're actually small because the public sector is making it very difficult for startups to flourish. So you want to find a place where the public sector is cheering for you, or at least ignoring you and not doing damage. So that's one more thing. And the basic advice, as I mentioned before, and this is an important advice, if you're in a underperforming startup ecosystem, you either leave it if you build a startup. You're relatively crazy to stay in a bad startup ecosystem if you're building a startup, uh, or you lead it, which means that you're taking a leadership role in the startup ecosystem. The worst thing you can do is just stay there and complain. This is definitely not going to help you or the people around you. So basically, if you're in an underperforming startup ecosystem, leave it or lead it. It's basically that. There is not that much. There are not that much other options that you can choose from in a way. And that's at least what I think, but something to think about. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the importance of good startup ecosystems. Now let's talk a little bit about why does the public sector care about startup ecosystems? They used to not care that much. Like about 10 years ago, they looked at it as a regular business and maybe just as something that they don't really understand. The public sector greatly changed. And I want to tell you that just like the topic we discussed in the beginning of a startup ecosystem, the public sector must be the real engine because like Joao said, nobody wants to invest in infrastructure and nobody's going to see a real return on investment, and that means that the public sector has to do the initial push. There is no other way. And why should the public sector do that? Because if the startup ecosystem is successful, you get to generate a lot of jobs, you get future tax revenue. Look at a country like Israel, where I am now. A lot of the tax revenues of the country is coming from the startups. That's kind of sustains that's the new oil in a way. You get to support urban innovation because those startups are pushing things to the market that are also going to influence your city. You get the prestige of people saying, wow, Tel Aviv is a great startup ecosystem hub, San Francisco is great, London is great. So you receive an additional, Lisbon now received a lot of prestige because of the Web Summit. So the idea is that this is very, very helpful for the way people are judging you from the outside and the way people are kind of measuring the city itself or even the country, and you attract talent. So instead of losing talent of people leaving the ecosystem, if it's successful, you actually attract foreign talent of high quality. So there are many, many reasons of why the public sector wants to push for a successful startup ecosystem. Let's talk a little bit about the most essential things that each startup ecosystem should have. So if those don't exist, you should probably work on them first. So the first thing is meetups and events. And the big question is, are there any startup events in your city? So let's say you go to the city now as a developer, public sector developer, or private sector, or even a startup. If you don't see a list of events that are upcoming in your city for startups, you're in a problem. It means there are crickets, that nobody is basically working on anything startup ecosystem related and sharing it. So the idea is that events, I'll tell you an example, for example, from Israel in Tel Aviv. In Tel Aviv, every day you can choose between 4 or 5 events that are happening, even more. Sometimes there are 10. So the idea is that there is such a variety of events that you always have a place. Always have a place to go to mingle, to catch up with people, to connect with investors, entrepreneurs, and co-founders, and so on. So events are absolutely critical. And again, if it doesn't happen now in your city, this is probably the first thing that you're worthwhile working on. It's not that difficult to generate those events. Co-working. Is there a place where people can work in the same location? If there is no co-working space in your city, that's a problem. And I've seen a few cities that have zero co-working spaces or co-working spaces that are not functioning. It's a problem because then people don't have the possibility of working together and connecting. They're kind of left at home, working on their own thing isolated. So co-working are very, very important. I'm now in WeWork, by the way, and WeWork, I know, received a lot of press recently about stuff that is happening there and so on and so on. But I have to tell you, this is such a vibrant place where people are meeting each other and are creating businesses together and so on, that the government should have paid companies like WeWork and other co-working spaces just to exist, because the amount of positive network effect that they have is substantial. One more thing that you want to see in an ecosystem is some kind of an incubator or accelerator for trainings, for knowledge sharing, and so on. That there is some kind of an institution that does something that is related to startups and entrepreneurs and investors and so on. Usually, accelerators are doing exactly that. You also want to be in a situation that the startup ecosystem has a lot of shared information about the ecosystem. So the idea is, let's say you're now in I don't know, Malaga in Spain, and you want to know what's going on currently in Malaga. Is there a place? Is there an online resource that you can go to and see what are the startups that are currently there? What are they working on, and so on. If not, you might be working on something else that other founder in the same city in Malaga is working on and you don't even know. You could have connected way, way before. So the idea is, this is, by the way, something that we do in Startup Link. We care a lot about the mapping. We really care about mapping an ecosystem because it really helps people to visualize. And I showed you the map in the screenshot before, what's going on in the startup ecosystem. So that's just as a side note. We talked a little bit about events. Let's do a little bit of an expansion about events. What types of events are there? So in Startup Link, we're doing a lot of basic networking events. Usually we do them on the weekend, by the way. So events are absolutely great. Just give people the opportunity to network. You can do events with a speech, usually someone that has domain knowledge on a specific topic, or you can do pitching events. By the way, we're doing pitching events every Wednesday, online pitching event, pitching.startuplink.com. We have dozens of people joining, and it's really fun event. But this is more global. You want to do also those pitching efforts on a city level as well. And I do want to tell you that sometimes one of the struggles of events is, where do you do them? And they're going to cost money and so on. Not necessarily. You're going to have a lot of pubs that will be happy to host your event just so you bring them people. Universities, if they have their mind and heart in the right place, are going to totally be happy to host your event in the university. Co-working spaces as well, because for them it's free marketing or publicity. You bring 10 people to your event, people see the co-working space and say, you know what, I might be working from here. And also the government, public sector, municipalities will also, in many cases, give you space to run your event because that's their role, to develop the ecosystem. And by the way, if they don't, it's a warning sign that they don't care that much, just as a side note. Let's talk a little bit about, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A button or the chat, and you can also present yourself. We're 20 people here, and other than Joa and Ravi, no one introduced themselves, so it would be great to hear a little bit about what you're doing and so on. To start a discussion also between you, so feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Good. Benefits of becoming a leader of your ecosystem. So you might be wondering, if you're a startup founder, you know what, I'm so busy on my startup, I don't really have the time to build an ecosystem. And the question is, why should you do it? So let me try to encourage you to actually 10 or 5% of your time and dedicate it to building your own local startup ecosystem. First of all, you will have a lot of connections because by building the ecosystem, you become a connector. Connectors have extra leverage on anything that they do. So something to think about, becoming a connector or becoming the legend of the ecosystem, the person that kind of got it rolling, has a lot of benefits specifically on that. You will see a lot of external positive effects. Also, you're going to have knowledge of who is doing what. Knowledge, as you know, is power. If you're the person that knows who is working on what, where, that's pretty powerful in anything that you do. You can get potential budgets from the public sector. The public sector wants to promote ecosystems, but they don't know usually how in many, many cases. So if you're actually running successful initiatives that are creating positive impact on your local startup ecosystem, very likely the public sector will promote those events and even support them financially. The same goes from the corporations. So if you have corporations in your city and you're building some kind of an event or initiatives and so on, they will be happy to also sponsor you as well. And the last thing is karma. And karma does, in a way, count. When you do enough good things, when people or big organizations or startup ecosystems owe you, and they will pay back in some way. You know, you will see it even in 5 or 6 years. So there are many, many reasons of taking the time and kind of trying to help your local startup ecosystem grow. Good. Let's see a little bit about something that is interesting. We're getting to the end of the presentation. So again, if you have any questions and so on, feel free to ask. Perception follows reality. So that's what we usually think, but it's not necessarily the case. In many, many cases, reality is actually following perception. Okay? So if people think that the startup ecosystem is successful, it will usually become successful. That's the beauty of it. A startup ecosystem is a little bit of an abstract topic. So nobody really knows how good is the ecosystem. That's why the rankings are important. They're making it less abstract. But the idea is that if there is a consensus about the startup ecosystem being successful, for example, in Israel or in Estonia, it will become successful anyway, because enough people have a critical mass of thinking that it's successful. So let's talk a little bit about how do you build perception? How do you create a situation that people are perceiving the ecosystem as a successful ecosystem? So we'll talk about that in a second, but I'm just going to turn to the chat for a second and see if we have any question. Joao is asking, is it worth developing a satellite of a large existing hub? Good question. What we're trying to do, usually what we offer over here, what we say is that, yes, for example, if you're in Espinho, Espinho is about 40 or 50 minutes by train from Porto, or about 30 minutes. Yes, it's worthwhile to build a satellite hub in Espinho and so on, because not everyone has the time to travel to the big city. And many, many small municipalities that are close to big cities are giving up. They're like saying, no, I'm close to this one, forget it. I don't care about developing an ecosystem because we're very close to this one. And then what happens? They're so basking on the success of Lisbon, and then they see the youngsters of the municipality leaving to Lisbon, they're leaving to Porto, they're going to San Francisco, they're just leaving. So the idea is it makes total sense for the public sector and also for local entrepreneurs to develop a satellite of an existing hub, definitely. And usually in a place that is a little bit far away from this hub, but not that far away. So that's what I would do, and you see that happening now in small municipalities. We have a few partners in really small municipalities in Canada. They're doing exactly the same because they want to keep people there. Good, and I see that we have Stefan from Brussels, Belgium. That's good. I might be going to Antwerp next month, so we might be able to team up. If you leave me your email, I'll send you an email when I'm in Antwerp, and I'll try to visit you. Also, Joao, the same. When I go to Lisbon the next time, I was just there. Good. So let's talk a little bit about perception and how to build perception of a successful startup ecosystem. So, and we talked about this again. If people think that the startup ecosystem is successful, it will become successful. A good example, by the way, is Estonia. Estonia is an ecosystem that gets so much publicity recently for digitalization, e-residency, and so on, that we keep on hearing about it. So just by keeping hearing about it, it's becoming successful. By the way, I was there last year. I was not that impressed. To be honest, there is no investment there. There are very, very few possibilities there to scale and to build a very substantial startup. But the perception is shaping that they do have it. So in a way, if the perception is winning reality, reality will have to catch up somehow. So that's very interesting case study for me, the Estonian case study. Now, let's talk a little bit about perception. How do you build perception in an ecosystem? First of all, nothing beats a success story for mentality change. And that's what happened, by the way, in Israel. Israel ecosystem developed because of a sale of a company called ICQ. It used to be, for the older generation, it used to be the messaging app. And what happened over there is that they sold to AOL in 2000 for about $200 million. And then all the young people, I was there in the army back then and so on, everyone was saying, wow, what the hell is a startup? And how did they do that? How did they sell in $200 million? And one day after, everyone said, when I'm finishing school or finishing the army, I'm going to build a startup. So the idea is that a success story is absolutely critical in the building of a perception of an ecosystem and the building of an ecosystem. Now, I'll tell you something else about success stories. Usually when you do have a success story, and by the way, Estonia had a great success story with Skype, although the founders were Swedish, but it doesn't matter. It's actually perceived as an Estonian startup. The Skype mafia, as they're called, basically started to invest in Estonian startups, and they do have a few successful startups. I have to give them credit for that. They have Pipedrive, TransferWise, and so on. Really good startups. Few of them, but good startups. And the idea is that the people that make money out of the success story, if they feel connected to the ecosystem, they're going to invest in the ecosystem. And that creates a lot of benefits as well. And as you know, there are a few countries now in the world, and I gave very, very different examples of ecosystems that are now a lot perceived as a success story. So Israel is a justified success story. It's actually a startup nation in a way. Lots of good companies that are scaling and bringing giant tax benefits and economic benefits to the country. Estonia is a country that probably does the best marketing in the world for startup ecosystems. Brilliant work by the public sector in Estonia. Heads down. Reality is not following that much, but it will if they continue and if they close this gap. And Rwanda is a very interesting example from Africa. As you know, Rwanda is a country that about 20 years ago had a massive genocide, and it's a country that was in the lowest point that the country can be. And now they're really considered as the tiger of the African nations. They're moving fast, very, very fast. Great policy, great regulation, great public support. And now they're becoming a startup ecosystem success story. And yeah, that's exactly that. And all those three countries are working on perception, and it connects to the reality. The conclusion, by the way, is that you have to celebrate success or any ecosystem win that you have, even if it's on our rankings or if it's an exit of a founder or whatever. Celebrate it, because when enough people are celebrating, good things are happening. That's just as a side note. I'll turn to the chat for a second. Hey, Stefan, thanks for the email. Good. Yeah, Ravi is talking a little bit about Estonia and being a virtual person. That's true. Estonia is allowing you to do e-residency and kind of not being there as well. So yeah, makes sense. A lot of so they have amazing promotion and amazing. Some people will say gimmicks, but it seems like it's working out for them. So absolutely, we have to learn from those examples. Those are free examples that we have to learn from. So that's something to think about. Joao, you're asking a little bit about the rankings. I'll just give you the short version. The rankings are basically not really checking soft topics like sustainability and governments and so on, because it's very hard to measure and compare ecosystems using those soft topics. So the only thing we're checking is how how good they are, and the business environment. So we're trying to totally avoid assumptions, like because you can say immigration, more immigration is good or bad. Integration of minorities, this is good or bad. Cost of living, good or bad. You never know. It's actually like a chaos theory. You can't really stick a causality on it. So the idea is that what we decided in Startup Link, because we don't have enough knowledge and we don't have a theoretical model, and we also don't feel like there should be a theoretical model, we just judge it by very, very clear, quantifiable metrics. So just as a side note. Good. Okay, so let's see if I think we're really close to the end here, but let's see if we have other topics to discuss. Yeah, I'll just tell you a little bit about what we do if it's relevant for your activities. I'm going to share the links with you in a second. So I'll just tell you that we have two types of partnerships. We're working with governments all over the world, government, municipalities, and public sector on startup ecosystem promotion, mapping, and research and consulting. I've just been in Cape Verde, for example, consulting the government there. So it was super fun, and we really enjoy working with governments on those topics of promoting the ecosystem. Remember, perception is key. You must show the world that your startup ecosystem is excelling. And mapping, remember, sharing the knowledge about what's going on in the ecosystem, also very important. So that's exactly what we do. I'm going to share the links with you, and you can always be in touch with us at feedback@startuplink.com. And we also have city partnerships with the private sector. Over there, what we do is focusing more on the promotion on the of your organization, of your CEO. On our report map communities, we give you increased branding as a startup ecosystem leader and admin to our communities, so you can actually connect and build those communities, what we talked about, the events and the meetups and so on. So again, if you're interested, citypartner.startuplink.com. And I think that's pretty much it for today. I'm just going to share this in my email, eli@startuplink.com. So if you're interested to connect, our Twitter is at startuplink. I'll share just the links with you that I shared right now. So just a second. And definitely interested to, so I'm just going to share the links in the chat. And definitely interested to have you in our next webinars as well. Just explain a little bit about the links that I shared. Startuplink.com, register a startup, see the ranking tables, report.startuplink.com, where you can download the report. The third link is all our meetups, where you can do events, and you can actually organize events in our meetups as well. And the ecosystem partnership is for the public sector. Citypartner.startuplink.com is for the private sector. Yeah, that's basically it. So looking forward to seeing you in our next webinar. Thank everyone for arriving. It's pretty early for everyone, so that's pretty cool. And I'll just share one more link with you. This is a link to the pitching event that we have every Wednesday. Dozens of entrepreneurs, really fun event. People pitching their startup. And if you want to show up and give advice to the people that are pitching, please do and register in this link. So it's kind of a tradition that we do every Wednesday, 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. London time. So thank you all for arriving, and we'll be in touch. Have a good one. Bye.